The Galactic Council chamber gleamed with an unnatural brilliance, its polished crystal walls refracting light in mesmerizing patterns. Commander Velyss Xar'eth stood at the center of the semicircular room, her tall, silver-clad figure a picture of authority among the murmuring counselors. Her mandibles clicked faintly as she waited for silence, a faint shimmer of pride in her compound eyes. Today was a day of triumph, or so she thought. Before her, the counselors, representatives of dozens of starfaring species, sat in their ornate chairs, their faces displaying various alien expressions of approval and curiosity. The topic of the day? Earth, a backwater world on the outskirts of Alliance-controlled space, inhabited by an unruly, primitive species who had only recently begun tinkering with interstellar travel. Velyss had been tasked with pacifying this species, bringing Earth into compliance with Alliance regulations and stripping it of its resources to serve more productive worlds. It is a planet of reckless, disorganized bipeds, Velyss declared, her voice resonant and commanding. Their technology is crude, their civilizations fractured. They lack the discipline required to pose any serious threat to the Alliance. She gestured toward the holographic projection of Earth spinning slowly above the council floor, its blue oceans and green continents almost mocking in their serenity. I propose a swift intervention. A show of force will suffice to bring them in line. There were murmurs of agreement from the counselors, though one or two hesitated. A reptilian envoy, her scales glinting gold, raised her clawed hand. Commander Xar'eth, she hissed, her voice a soft rasp, do not underestimate these humans. Their history is rife with violence. They have a peculiar resilience, an almost pathological refusal to submit. Velyss dismissed the warning with a flick of her claw. A primitive species lashing out in desperation is no match for the might of the Galactic Alliance. Their crude weapons will crumble against our shielding. Their chaos cannot withstand our precision. The Council, reassured by her confidence, voted overwhelmingly in favor of her plan. Within days, Velyss's fleet was on its way to Earth, brimming with the latest in energy-based weaponry and protected by shields that had never faltered in centuries of conflict. The mission seemed almost insultingly simple. The fleet arrived in the Sol system like a storm cloud blotting out the stars. Hundreds of sleek, silver ships formed a perfect formation as they approached Earth, scanning for points of interest. Their targets were identified within moments: military installations, communication hubs, and energy grids. Velyss gave the order to strike, confident the operation would be swift and bloodless. The first barrage lit up Earth's atmosphere in a cascade of fire and debris. Cities trembled as Alliance plasma beams reduced key infrastructure to molten ruin. Velyss watched from her command ship, arms crossed, as the humans scrambled to respond. Their primitive satellites were destroyed in minutes, their radio signals chaotic and frantic. It was almost disappointing. She was already preparing her victory speech when the first counterattack hit. Out of nowhere, a barrage of missiles erupted from the surface, cutting through space with shocking precision. The fleet's shields shimmered as they absorbed the brunt of the attack, but several ships were caught off guard, their hulls torn open by what appeared to be conventional explosives. Velyss's mandibles twitched in surprise. Primitive or not, the humans had struck back with an aggression she had not anticipated. "Status report," she barked, her voice slicing through the hum of the command deck. "Commander, we've sustained minimal damage," her second-in-command replied, his voice tense. "But the humans' weapons are more advanced than we estimated. They've integrated technologies we haven't seen before." Velyss leaned forward, her claws digging into the edge of her console. On the projection before her, Earth's response was escalating. Fighter jets, crewed by Alliance standards, swarmed into the skies, coordinating with ground-based missile systems in a relentless assault. Velyss couldn't help but admire their audacity. These creatures fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Then came the transmissions. Human voices crackled across Alliance channels, breaking through encrypted frequencies with alarming ease. Most were panicked, desperate calls for aid, but one in particular stood out. A deep, authoritative voice, laced with both anger and resolve. This is General Marcus Holloway of the United States Armed Forces. You have attacked our home, unprovoked. You've made a grave mistake. Velyss's mandibles froze mid-click. She had studied the humans' languages, but the weight of those words carried a menace she hadn't fully understood before. There was no fear in the voice, only determination. It was as if the human had already decided the outcome of this conflict, and it wasn't in her favor. "Commander," another officer interrupted, "our scans indicate they're mobilizing a planetary defense network. Their capabilities are rapidly escalating." "How?" Velyss snapped, her calm demeanor beginning to crack. "They're barely spacefaring. How are they countering our systems?" The officer hesitated. "It appears they're adapting. Quickly. They've already neutralized several of our drones by—" He paused, incredulous. "By hacking into their guidance systems?" Velyss turned back to the projection, her compound eyes narrowing. This was no primitive species. These humans were something else entirely, and their unpredictability was beginning to unnerve her. For every ship her fleet destroyed, it seemed 2 more human countermeasures sprang up in its place. Their crude technology was being wielded with a level of ingenuity she had never encountered. As the battle dragged on, her fleet began to falter. Reports flooded in of human pilots performing suicidal maneuvers to disable larger Alliance ships, of ground forces rigging improvised electromagnetic pulses to disrupt shields. It wasn't just their technology, it was their sheer willpower, their refusal to back down even in the face of overwhelming odds. And at the forefront of it all was America. Velyss hadn't accounted for the peculiarities of human geopolitics, but it was clear now that this United States was leading the charge. Their coordination was relentless, their tactics unconventional. Even the Galactic Alliance, with its centuries of military tradition, was struggling to predict their next move. As another wave of human missiles breached the fleet's defenses, Velyss felt the first pangs of doubt. This was no simple pacification mission. This was a war, and she had underestimated her enemy. Her claws tightened on the console as General Holloway's voice echoed in her mind. "You've made a grave mistake." She wouldn't admit it, not yet, but the human was right. Earth's skies burned, streaked with the fiery trails of descending wreckage. Alliance ships, once a testament to technological superiority, now fell like fragile ornaments shattered by an unyielding force. Commander Velyss Xar'eth stood motionless on the bridge of her flagship, her claws trembling against the console. Every report that streamed in was worse than the last. It wasn't just a skirmish anymore, it was a rout, and her forces, the pride of the Galactic Alliance, were on the losing side. "Commander," the voice of her second-in-command cut through the cacophony of alarms. "We've lost another cruiser in the Eastern Hemisphere." The humans deployed a tactical EMP burst to disable its shielding before targeting its reactor. Velyss's mandibles twitched in disbelief. A tactical EMP? How do these primitives even possess such knowledge, let alone deploy it with such precision? Her voice was sharp, but it betrayed the growing unease beneath her composed exterior. The officer hesitated, his luminous eyes flicking toward the live feed of Earth's surface. "They're adapting. Rapidly. Every time we neutralize one of their systems, they introduce a countermeasure. They've also begun retrofitting our capture drones to attack us." Velyss clenched her claws, the weight of the situation pressing on her like a collapsing star. The humans weren't just fighting, they were learning. With every engagement, they grew more dangerous. And central to this resistance was the United States, a nation whose ingenuity and audacity seemed limitless. The transmission came again, cutting through the static and chaos. General Marcus Holloway's voice was calm, but laced with steel. "Commander Xar'eth, your fleet is crumbling. Withdraw now, or we will ensure you leave nothing behind but debris." The audacity of the message sent a ripple of indignation through the bridge. Velyss leaned forward, her compound eyes narrowing. "Patch me through." The communication officer hesitated but complied, and moments later, Velyss's image was transmitted to the human's command center. On the screen stood Marcus Holloway, clad in a uniform that bore the scars of battle. His face, lined with age and resolve, radiated a quiet confidence that unsettled Velyss. "You are persistent for such a fragile species," she said, her voice steady but cold. "Surely you understand that resistance is futile. Surrender, and your planet may yet survive." Holloway met her gaze without flinching. "Fragile? Maybe. But you've underestimated what desperation, ingenuity, and a refusal to submit can accomplish. You came here thinking you could walk over us. Now look around. How's that working out for you?" Velyss's mandibles clicked in irritation. "Your victories are temporary. You cannot sustain this level of resistance. Your resources are finite. Your species is scattered and disorganized." "Disorganized?" Holloway's smile was grim. "We've united in ways you can't begin to comprehend. For every city you've targeted, a dozen more are producing weapons. For every satellite you destroy, we launch 3 replacements. You thought this would be over in a day, and now you're stuck in a war you don't understand." Before she could reply, the transmission cut off. Holloway had made his point, and he didn't wait for her response. The calculated arrogance of it infuriated her, but it also forced her to confront a truth she had been avoiding. They were outmatched not in technology, but in resolve. The battle raged on, and every engagement brought fresh humiliation. American warplanes, primitive compared to Alliance fighters, danced through the skies with reckless abandon, executing maneuvers so unpredictable they confounded the fleet's targeting algorithms. On the ground, soldiers deployed improvised explosives and electromagnetic weapons that shredded Alliance drones. Even the civilian population joined the fight, transforming into a network of resistance fighters who relayed intelligence, sabotaged supply lines, and hacked into Alliance systems. In one particularly stunning display, a group of human engineers managed to capture a disabled Alliance frigate, strip it of its advanced weaponry, and retrofit the ship into a hybrid human-alien war machine. The craft turned against Velyss's fleet with devastating results, exploiting weaknesses her engineers had arrogantly assumed were unassailable. "Commander," an officer called out, interrupting her thoughts. "They're targeting the flagship." Velyss's head snapped up. On the tactical display, a formation of human aircraft was closing in, supported by ground-based missile systems. Her ship's shields were still operational, but she knew by now that the humans would have a plan. They always did. "Prepare countermeasures," she ordered. "Deploy interceptors and reinforce the shields." The bridge crew scrambled to comply, but deep down, Velyss knew it wouldn't be enough. The humans' attacks were never random. Each strike was calculated, designed to exploit vulnerabilities she hadn't even realized existed. As the first missile struck, the flagship shuddered violently, its shields flickering. The second impact was even more jarring, and the alarms that followed signaled a breach in the lower decks. Velyss gripped the console, her calm facade finally cracking. "How are they doing this?" she demanded, her voice rising. "They're coordinating their attacks across multiple fronts," her second-in-command replied, his tone grim. "They've hacked into our targeting systems, and, Commander, they've breached our communications network." Velyss froze. The thought was unthinkable. No species had ever managed to penetrate the Alliance's encrypted systems. And yet, here were the humans, not only breaching her fleet, but turning her own technology against her. She stared at the tactical display, watching as the humans closed in, their tactics relentless and their morale unshaken. It was in that moment, as her flagship trembled under the weight of their assault, that she realized the full extent of her mistake. They weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. And if she didn't act quickly, she wouldn't just lose this battle. She would lose the war. As the ship's systems began to fail one by one, Velyss turned to her second-in-command. "Order a retreat," she said, the words tasting like ash. "Pull back the fleet to the outer orbit. We need to regroup." The officer hesitated. "Commander, if we retreat." "Do it," she snapped, her voice cutting through the chaos. The order was given, and the remaining ships began to pull away from Earth's atmosphere. Velyss watched in silence as her fleet limped into the void, battered and humiliated. She had come to this world expecting an easy victory, a quick subjugation of a primitive species. Instead, she had found a relentless, defiant enemy who had turned the tide of battle through sheer willpower and ingenuity. And as the humans' cheers echoed across intercepted channels, Velyss knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The silence aboard the flagship was oppressive, punctuated only by the faint hum of emergency power systems. Velyss Xar'eth stood at the center of the bridge, her hands clasped tightly behind her back, staring at the swirling blue-green planet now far below. Retreat had never tasted so bitter. She could feel the weight of her crew's eyes on her, a mixture of fear, confusion, and doubt mirrored in their gazes. The Galactic Alliance did not retreat until now. "Damage report," she demanded, her voice sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Severe," her second-in-command replied after a long pause. His voice was quieter than usual, as though he feared provoking her. "We've lost over 40% of the fleet. 2 of our cruisers are unaccounted for, and nearly all surviving vessels have sustained significant damage. Repairs will take weeks, if not longer." Velyss's claws flexed involuntarily. The scale of the losses was staggering, unprecedented. "And the humans?" she asked, forcing herself to remain composed. The officer hesitated before answering. "Minimal losses on their end. They've fortified their planetary defenses and continue to deploy reinforcements. It seems they've been stockpiling resources for years in preparation for an event like this." The commander turned away from the display, her compound eyes narrowing. "Years? Yes, Commander. Their level of readiness suggests they anticipated an invasion. Perhaps not from us specifically, but—" He trailed off, unwilling to state the obvious. Velyss finished the thought for him. But from someone, the humans, despite their primitive technology and chaotic nature, had been preparing for this day. They had studied the stars, watched for threats, and built their defenses in the shadows of their turbulent history. They had expected the storm, and they had met it head-on. She walked toward the main viewport, her gaze fixed on Earth's distant surface. The memories of the battle replayed in her mind, each moment sharper and more humiliating than the last. The humans had not fought like any species she had encountered before. They had fought with a reckless brilliance, turning desperation into strategy and defiance into victory. Her thoughts were interrupted by an incoming transmission. The communications officer hesitated, then announced, "It's from the humans, Commander. General Holloway." "Put it through," she ordered. The screen flickered, and Holloway's face appeared once again, calm but resolute. Behind him, a command center buzzed with activity, human operators moving with purpose. He leaned forward, his sharp eyes locking onto hers. "Commander Xar'eth," he began, his tone steady but firm. "I trust you've had time to reconsider the nature of this conflict." Velyss felt her mandibles twitch, but she kept her expression neutral. "You've proven to be a more formidable opponent than anticipated, General. I will grant you that." Holloway's lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Formidable enough to force you into retreat. That's not a position the Galactic Alliance is accustomed to, is it?" Her claws tightened behind her back. "Your victories are temporary. You've merely delayed the inevitable." "Delayed?" Holloway leaned back in his chair, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "Commander, you brought this war to us. You attacked unprovoked, believing we were weak and disorganized. You underestimated our will to fight, our capacity to adapt. That's your mistake, not ours." The truth in his words stung more than Velyss cared to admit. He wasn't wrong. Every decision she had made, every assumption she had relied upon, had been shattered by the humans' relentless resistance. "You don't understand the forces you've set in motion, General," she said, her voice low. "The Alliance will not tolerate defeat. This is only the beginning." "Maybe," Holloway replied, his tone unflinching. "But if you come back, we'll be ready. And next time, we won't just defend ourselves. We'll take the fight to you." The audacity of his words left the bridge in stunned silence. Velyss studied him, searching for any sign of bluff or bravado, but all she saw was conviction. This human truly believed they could challenge the Galactic Alliance, and perhaps, for the first time, she began to wonder if he might be right. "Is that a threat, General?" she asked, her voice colder than she intended. "It's a promise," Holloway said simply. "Now, if you're done licking your wounds, I suggest you leave our system and take a long, hard look at what you've started. Because this isn't over. With that, the transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in uneasy silence. Velyss turned back to the viewport, her thoughts churning. The humans had not only defended their planet, they had issued a challenge to the entire Galactic Alliance. They were a species unlike any she had encountered, driven by an indomitable will that defied logic. Commander, her second-in-command, ventured cautiously. What are your orders? She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on Earth, that deceptively fragile world teeming with life and defiance. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but resolute. Begin the withdrawal. We'll regroup at the nearest outpost and assess our losses. But make no mistake, this isn't the end. The officer saluted and relayed her commands to the fleet. One by one, the remaining ships powered their engines and began to retreat into the void, their formations broken, but their resolve intact. As the flagship turned away from Earth, Velyss felt a strange mix of emotions. Defeat, yes, but also a flicker of something else. Respect, perhaps, for a species that had defied every expectation. For the first time in her career, she found herself questioning the Alliance's doctrine, its unshakable belief in its own superiority. The humans had shown her something she had not anticipated: the power of a people who refused to yield, who fought not just with weapons, but with their very spirit. And as her fleet disappeared into the depths of space, Velyss knew one thing for certain. The war had only just begun.